I want to go back a little bit and say that the objective of our role on this committee is to ensure that the individuals that we work with, those individuals with disabilities, have full access to programs and services as other non-disabled individuals. So we all work very closely together, all the partners, to ensure that that happens. So I'm not going to take up a lot of time, just a few little housekeeping things. Some of you may have questions. We're asking that you hold those questions until the end. You may want to put it in the chat room, and we'll have a little Q&A session at the end of the at the training. And then what we'll also do, I think, Keith, the presentation is going to be put up on the CAPTE website for those who are not able to attend today, but you can access that information at a later date. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Graham Sissom, who's going to talk to us about how to work with individuals with disabilities. It's you. You're on, Graham.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure this is working. Trying to pull it up. Okay, can everybody see that?
Graham.
All right.
Graham,
yes.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just want to point out to anyone that might be interested in viewing the full screen in closed caption, there's a link in the chat box that you can use to access it. So please take advantage of that if you want to. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Graham Sisson. I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the Department of Rehabilitation Services. Also serve as Executive Director of the Governor's Office on Disability and the state's ADA Coordinator. I've got my phone numbers here, so when you get a copy of this presentation, if there's other questions that you have, you can contact me after this. And today I'm basically going to cover a lot of things. It's really what I'm covering is the why and the how. The why, talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act basics, all the way from the definition of disability and associative discrimination, Title II and Section 504 obligations, employment, reasonable accommodation, asking about disability, public access, Title II. Then I'm going to relate it to how ADA and Title II crossover with Section 188 of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And then, as Yolanda was talking about, talk about disability awareness, basic etiquette, people first language, myths and facts. Also, working with persons who have different disabilities, such as vision impairments and blindness, hearing impairments, deafness, psychiatric/mental illness, intellectual disabilities, mobility disability, hidden disability. So that's going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that. And we're going to talk about, Dr. Lay, say this as a Deputy Attorney General, all information provided is non-binding and does not constitute legal advice, but I'm available, as stated before, to provide further information. And this is the Ultra Reader's Digest version and includes some best practices. Now, I'm going to hit the high points on some of the slides because I'm trying to get it done in an hour. I've heard that we're going to have time for questions at the end. And there, again, we're talking about physical access and program access, but it all boils down to equal access and opportunity for people with disabilities and making the career centers more welcoming for people with disabilities. And of course, this is kind of the history of the Career Center survey. I've been working with the Career Centers for quite a bit of time, since 2005, when we had the MAPS program, the Mapping Accessible Program Services, where we surveyed all the career centers. Then we resurveyed the career centers again for physical and program access in 2011, around that time period with the Navigators program. Then, of course, 2015, 2018, we had the ADRS, Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services Access Team, consisting of me, Michael Papp, Jason Martin, and Daniel Lute, to survey physical and program access at the career centers. So the career center survey we used was developed by the Department of Labor, and we also use a program access checklist. And we developed action items for the comprehensive career centers and the satellite centers, which are now known as affiliate centers. And then the ADA basics, as you know, the ADA has 5 titles: Title I, employment; I'm going to discuss a little bit more about who that covers. Title II, Public Services, I mentioned that before. That's the crux of what applies to the career centers. Of course, Title III, Private Businesses. Sometimes the career center contracts with a private business. They need to make sure the private business complies with the ADA too. And of course, Title IV, Telecommunications. This is the relay system. This is part of the effective communication. I'm going to talk a little bit about video relay, which is a more update version of that. And then Title IV, Miscellaneous. The main thing about Title V, Miscellaneous. The main thing about this is it covers, it lays out who is not covered by the ADA. So, and those include pedophilia, kleptomania, psychoactive disorders caused by illegal use of drugs, current illegal users of drugs. So it's important to understand who has a disability under the law. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. Of course, the definition of disability is the same under the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It's a three-pronged definition. If you meet any one of these prongs, you're considered to have a disability under the ADA or Section 504. First one is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. I'm a wheelchair user. I have a spinal cord injury. My spinal cord injury is a physical impairment that substantially limits me in the major life activity of walking. To give you an example. Second one is a record impairment. These are people who have a history of who are misclassified as having disability. An example, this would be somebody with cancer that's in remission. They would have a record of impairment. Or somebody who has severe learning disability that's misclassified as having an intellectual disability. And the last prong, being regarded as having impairment, this is the broadest category. These are folks that don't actually have a disability, but are treated as having one. An example, if somebody is obese, but that's all they are is obese, doesn't have any side conditions, and they're treated as having disability, they can be covered under this regard as. Of course, the social discrimination, this shows the broad reach. The ADA not only covers people with disabilities, it covers people who associate with people with disabilities. And examples are parents of children with disabilities. A lot of times employers may not hire somebody, a parent that has a child with significant disability because they're afraid the parent will miss time off work. This is an example of illegal associate discrimination. Business partners, somebody finds out your business partner has a condition like AIDS and they refuse to visit with, this is associate discrimination. Or friends. So association is important. In another way, the ADA is expansive. Other information. Both the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act require that programs of public entities be accessible to people with disabilities. And I have people with disabilities abbreviated as PWD. Program access is more than just physical access to programs and activity services. Program access applies only to areas open to the general public. Program access can be, you can relocate services from inaccessible areas to accessible ones with buildings that were built before the ADA, but not new construction. Most of the career centers that we have are new facilities or facilities built since the ADA has came into being on July 26, 1990. And again, alternative methods. I mentioned this in the slide. If you can't provide something one way, you consider other ways to provide a service. It's basically a change in practice to accommodate people with disabilities, or as I mentioned, a relocation of a service to an accessible area. And I know I'm speaking quickly here. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. I'm trying to cover a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. And I am very pleased to be here with y'all this morning. And of course, websites. Websites are a major way information is shared today. They are considered a program or service covered by Title II, and they should be accessible to people with disabilities. There's something called WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. They're coming up with a new version 3.0. And I've got some websites on the slide that I want you to just look at. When you get a copy of this, you can look at it further. And there may be a future attempt to include web access standards under the ADA. I think there will be legislation in the future to do that. Just want to give you some cutting edge information there. Of course, the ADA and the Rehab Act, each career center is a service operated by a partnership of public entities. And we're becoming a partnership today. You can see the partnership of public entities covered by Title II and Section 504, since there's federal money involved. The career center system should anticipate the needs of people with disabilities in the physical design of centers and design of services. So if somebody says, well, I've never seen a person with a disability around here, were you welcoming and inviting? And it's like Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. I don't know if you know about the movie Field of Dreams, but anyway, if you don't, maybe I'll give you some information about that later. Facility access requirements. The main thing about this is there is no grandfathering. Many people say, well, our building's been around before the ADA, we're grandfathered. And even if you're a landlord or tenant and you're a tenant, you're only leasing a building, you're still responsible for making sure your facility is accessible. New construction, alterations, and renovation are the highest standards. They should be completely accessible. Existing buildings, I talk about program access, but again, the idea is that even though you're an existing building, you still have some obligations. Historical buildings aren't totally exempted. If they're making a change would destroy historically significant feature, that would be exempted, but you still have to consider other alternatives. All right, accessible design standards. These are the things that when I talk about how to make things accessible, this is the how. They're the basic standards listed in the Fiscal Access Checklist that was developed by the Department of Labor. And the Governor's Office on Disability can get you a copy of this. An example are van accessible park space. How wide do you make them? The standards say 8 feet wide with an 8 feet wide access aisle, or 11 feet wide with a 5 feet wide access aisle. It gives you specific directions on how to make different features of your facilities accessible. And of course, employer rights and responsibility. Title I of the ADA only covers employers with 15 or more employees. The career centers work with different employers, and it only covers people with disabilities who can actually do the job. In other words, perform the essential function of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. This is what's called a qualified individual with disability. A covered employer is required to reasonably accommodate people with disabilities who are current employees or job applicants, unless to do so would cause an undue hardship. So it only covers individual with disabilities who are qualified, but reasonable accommodation, I'm spending a little bit of time talking about this today, because that's the great equalizer. And undue hardship is any action caused significant difficulty or expense. A lot of times it's not just money, it could be disruption to the program that could be an undue hardship. And employers are not required to hire people with disabilities who are a direct threat to themselves or others, unless reasonable accommodation would reduce that threat to an acceptable level. You don't have to hire people with contagious diseases. If, example, somebody came with tuberculosis, or they had a contagious disease like COVID that wasn't under control, that could be a reason for not hiring somebody or give them a delay in hiring. Reasonable accommodation, it's a very broad definition. This is the great equalizer. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's any accommodation that has any change in the work environment, way things are customarily done, that enables an individual with disability to enjoy equal employment opportunities. It is a very broad definition. You can be very creative, and Michael Papp will be showing you some technology that could serve as reasonable accommodation too. And as I stated before, it's a great equalizer for equal opportunity. And reasonable accommodation has to be effective for the job or the benefits. I once had somebody build a ramp for me into a building that was almost at a 45-degree angle. That was not an effective accommodation. It applies only to barrier removal related to disability. I'm addicted to Diet Mountain Dew. It would not be a reasonable accommodation for me to ask for a refrigerator with Mountain Dew in it, because it's not related to a job-related barrier. It's not personal use items. You don't have to buy wheelchairs, eyeglasses, hearing aids, personal use items. Can go beyond requirements of the ADA. The ADA standards are a minimum. And it's something else to remember. If you don't remember anything else, one size does not fit all. Accommodations are individualized to a particular individual and a work-related situation. And again, reasonable accommodation, Section 188 of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act applies reasonable accommodations or defines them in three major areas: application and registration process, modification or adjustments to the job to help somebody perform the essential function of the job, or modification and adjustments that enable somebody to enjoy the same benefits and privileges enjoyed by other similarly situated employees. So again, I'm not reading that slide verbatim, but you can see that the Section 188 tracks the ADA, or is very similar to it. And again, employers are required to provide accommodations for individuals with disabilities to ensure equal access and opportunity. Again, as I've stated, this is the bottom line. And then also employers are required to engage something called interactive process. The employer meets with the person with disability, they discuss available accommodations, and they come up with a plan for providing those effective accommodations. It's about communication. And then the types of accommodation, this is not a laundry list, but it talks about make the facility accessible all the way to reassignment to a vacant position. These are all examples of accommodations, but there's many other types of accommodations that are not listed here. And of course, employment. During the interviews, the application process, employers cannot ask any question that's likely to elicit information about disability or obtain information. Employers may also ask about disability after a conditional offer of employment. But if they do exclude somebody because of disability found out during that, after that conditional offer of employment, they have to show there's a business reason. It has to be job-related necessity in order to exclude that person from the job. And then asking about disability for the purposes of, as the Career Center or as a provider of services, you can ask about disability. Such questions should be narrow in scope and ask in private to remain confidentiality information. Confidentiality is key when protecting somebody's information about their disability. To be safe, staff should ask everyone if they need assistance to prevent illegal discrimination. When they come to your front desk, you say, how can we help you? What can we provide you to help you access our services? Ask everybody that question. And then disability disclosure. Again, staff work with the individuals must obtain permission from the individual for disclosing. And all discussions between staff and customers must be conducted in a manner that ensures that preserves confidentiality. And again, confidentiality, the information about disability should be kept confidential. What this means in simple terms is use a private office space to discuss disability, where you can have a closed door. You know, a lot of times you need a signed release to obtain the information about disability. You want information about disability kept in locked file cabinets. If you don't have file cabinets, then you need to have it in separate files. And if it's on the computer, in password protected files. And only share information with people that have a need to know. Of course, the new ADA case I talked about, regarded as EEOC versus STME, 11th Circuit 2020. And it's basically an employee who was a massage therapist who had plans to go to Africa to visit the country of Ghana during the time when there was an Ebola outbreak. The employer said, if you go there, we're going to terminate you. She went there and they terminated her. And she tried to claim that she was regarded as having a disability. The question was, does regard as disability extend to a future disability? And the court said does not. It only applies to current or past disabilities or conditions that are regarded as. And of course, I've got information about Section 188. This is more information. I'm not going to go over this slide completely, other than to say that Section 188 WI of Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act has provisions identical to Section 188 of the Workforce Investment Act. And I've got legal sites for these in case we got some legal eagles out there and you want to look it up yourself. Another slide on the Section 188 prohibits discrimination on the grounds of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, and disability, or political affiliation. And it requires reasonable accommodation be provided to qualified individuals with disabilities in certain circumstances. And I showed you the reasonable accommodation provisions are already under Section 188. And it's also to ensure universal access and equal opportunity, just like the Americans with Disabilities Act. And equal opportunity, job centers or career centers required to ensure effective communication by providing auxiliary aids and devices. Auxiliary aids devices are accommodations that facilitate effective communication. And it also requires Section 188 provide program and architectural accessibility and access to information and communication technology. Again, it's very broad. It's very similar to the ADA. And these are examples. Since you had all that print, I said, I'm going to give y'all a little bit of a break from print and show some pictures. This is kind of like, where's Waldo? What is the barrier? Here's typical barrier that we saw in many career centers is the front reception desk was too high. And they need to lower a section of that. The next one is you have a pretty much an accessible restroom. It has the toilet with the correct height. It's got the grab bars on the side, but there's a trash can. That trash can is a temporary barrier that still is a barrier and needs to be removed. And this is typical. You see a sign on a door that has Braille. The ADA requires the sign to be on the right side of the door, mounted height of from the floor to the middle sign at 60 inches. And of course, here's many you see a curb ramp built right on the access aisle. People with the lifts coming out of vans need a level surface. A curb ramp prevents that from being a level surface. And here, I just thought this picture was funny. You can see those ramps, see how steep that is? That is not an effective accommodation. And of course, this one is a beautiful example of an accessible stall, plenty of room to the side of the toilet. The toilet's the right height, it's got the grab bars, but the flush handle is on the wrong side of the toilet. Here's another one. A lot of people refer to this as a wheelchair accessible stall. It's not. It doesn't allow a side-to-side transfer. This is what we call a standy stall. It would be dangerous for a person who uses a wheelchair to transfer on that stall. Of course, this is an example of an accessible workstation or technology. And of course, this is another temporary barrier that you have that trash can right in the area where somebody in a wheelchair would need to be able to pull that door around them. And of course, I just thought this was funny. It was at a career center. They had a plant next to the toilet. It looks nice, okay, but a temporary barrier that would not work. And of course, universal design is basically the philosophy of making things accessible, not just for one group, but for many groups. Making things accessible for people with disabilities helps other people without disabilities. The automatic door, people delivering packages, a curb cut, anybody moving something on wheels, higher toilets help people that can't lift themselves up from all the way on the floor. So larger print, examples. So resource list. We encourage all the career centers to maintain a resource list. So when you have requests for accommodations, you know where to get that accommodation. Typically, an example of this is an interpreter. Where would you get an American Sign Language interpreter? You should know that ahead of time. So, and the information on your resource list should be regularly updated. And of course, registration, I'm not going to go in this, but I mentioned on registration is that you ask everybody how you can help them and what you can provide to help them. And of course, here's the one, weigh in, everybody welcome. Somebody in a wheelchair and there's stairs right in front of them. This is not welcoming. Okay, emergency evacuation is another program. Make sure that you include this in your plans for people with disabilities, with all types of disabilities. Effective communication with people who are deaf and hard of hearing would include providing qualified interpreters or real-time computer-aided transcription services, written materials or the exchange of written notes, open and closed captioning, voice and text video-based telecommunication. There's a whole list of auxiliary aids and services provide effective communication for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. I hope I'm doing okay on time. So I'm doing okay. Yolanda will definitely gig me if I don't. So I want to make sure.
You're doing great, Graham. You're doing great.
Thank you. The individual disability determines which communication should be used. Designated staff members, This is where I'm talking about TTYs. If you have a TTY or text telephone, make sure people know how to use it. But we're encouraging career centers and other entities to now use video relay phones. I referred a deaf person one time to a text telephone or TTY, and they said, Graham, join the 21st century. In other words, use a video phone. You get free video phones through the Sorensen Video Relay. So we're in the process of getting those for the Career Center, but each Career Center will need a separate internet line for that phone. So effective communication, more information. For individual blind or visually impaired, there's a list on this slide of different types of auxiliary aid services to provide effective communication. Qualified readers, tape text, audio recordings, braille, magnification software, optical readers, large print materials, and there can be others. That's just an example. But for individual intellectual and developmental disabilities, their following strategies are adopted to ensure effective communication. Staff members assist with and provide extra time for the completion of forms and written instructions. This is key. Staff members repeat instructions, provide information in a slower voice, not as quickly as I'm speaking here today. Use simple sentences and words and graphics, symbols and pictures. Staff members provide a quiet environment for individuals to read materials if the public area has distractions. So again, this is about not being afraid if somebody with a significant disability walks into your center. Here's some strategies for helping these individuals. And again, for individual mobility impairments, and this would include myself, staff members should provide a clipboard to use a writing service if the counters or reception desks are too high. Sitting in a chair so you're at eye level with a person in a wheelchair so they're not craning their neck. Staff members provide seating if long lines develop and the person cannot stand for long periods of time. Or the staff ensures that the physical location program is accessible. So if you send somebody to training, make sure the training location has accessible parking, has a doorway somebody can go through, has accessible bathrooms, for instance. More on effective communication. For individual with speech impairments, there's some strategies. If a staff member doesn't understand something that the individual is communicating, he or she does not pretend to understand. This is key. And instead, the staff member asks the customer to repeat what he or she said and then repeats it back to them. Also, staff members should ask questions that require short answers or nod of the head. If staff member has difficulty understanding, he or she considers having the individual write or sit at a computer screen as an alternative. But you need to communicate to make sure that's acceptable to the person. And you can always ask an individual, what else would help you in this situation? This is a website that's a great resource list for increasing communications access. Now the disability awareness part. You said, finally, when were you going to get to it? I wanted to give you the background so you can understand why this is so important. Making eye contact with the individual. Of course, there's exceptions to that. Some folks with autism don't prefer direct eye contact. But speaking to a person with a disability directly instead of somebody associated with that person. My wife and I would go out to a restaurant. They would ask her what I would want to order. I'm sitting there in a suit and tie and I'm pretty well polished. And again, despite all things that I'm going to say, don't be afraid. People with disabilities are people first. It's better to make a mistake than not to interact at all. And of course, statistics. Why is this important? Nationally, 20% of the population has some type of disability. In Alabama, 31.5% of the population has disability. So there is a very strong chance that this population will come to your center for service or to your business. You want to be welcoming, inviting to them. And people with disabilities comprise the largest minority. Disability is an equal part of diversity. We got to remember, when we reach out, we're trying to be inclusive. Don't forget to include people with disabilities. That's why I went over the definition of disability to have you understand how broad it is and how many people it encompasses. And why care anyway? That's what There's something called TABs, temporarily able-bodied. Before I got my disability, I was a TAB. In an instant, a drunk driver hit the car I was riding it on, and I was instantly, my back was broken. I had a closed head injury in a matter of seconds. So everybody without a disability, in essence, is a TAB. So anybody become a person with a disability. So I like to say, join us now or join us later. It's all up to you. So what is the greatest risk factor for disability? It's age. If you live long enough, you acquire some type of disability. So this is very relevant. This will happen. In offering assistance, before you offer assistance to a person with a disability, ask him or her how they prefer to be helped. Do not be upset if someone refuses help. Sometimes somebody wants to be independent. I can give you an example of what happened to a friend of mine. Capitol Police, he was crossing the street behind the state capitol, Union Street. And Capitol Police, and this person had low-level quadriplegia. They could barely move their hands, but they were able to push their chair because they had like little knobs on the rims of their chair, and they were pushing very slowly. Capitol Police officer came up behind them, just started pushing them without asking them how they need to be helped. And then when they were almost across the street, the Capitol Police officer pushed the wheelchair the rest of the way and let go of it. My friend did not have control of his wheelchair at that point. He flipped over backwards and broke his neck again. So ask the person, and I'm not saying the Capitol Police officer did anything wrong. It is good to try to help people, but ask them first. And the best way to talk for anyone who comes to you is to stop. If she or she needs assistance, avoid spotlighting a disability. So let them ask you first if that's possible. Next slide. And this is something I put on here. So what do you call somebody with a disability? And it's got two people conversing. One of them's in a chair, and the guy in the wheelchair said, Joe would be fine, because that's his first name. So the most appropriate label is use the ones people's parents have given them. In other words, try to address person by their name. And then people first language, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm a Clint Eastwood fan. There's a book movie called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And my friend came up with this list. The good is always referred to the person first. Person with a disability, not disabled person. Person with epilepsy, not the epileptic. Do not use handicapped person. The word handicap has origins that make it synonymous with beggar. World War I and II veterans that came back with disabilities and couldn't find jobs were assigned street corners and given a cap. And the cap had a really wide brim and a deep pocket for holding coinage. And they were assigned these street corners, so the word became handed and cap, and that became handicap. So again, other words to avoid: cripple, invalid, wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair. And it's about accuracy too. These are not accurate. Call somebody that uses a wheelchair bound, because I don't drive my wheelchair. I don't sleep in my wheelchair. I don't take a shower in my wheelchair. I'm not confined to the wheelchair. It's actually freedom. Technology that helps people get around, it does not bind them. It is freedom. More words to avoid: differently abled, challenge, able-bodied, special, gimp, gimpy, afflicted, suffering from, intellectually disabled. Now, another word that's particularly bad is really the ugly is retarded. Do not call somebody retarded. It's a person with an intellectual disability. And then what I call the just plain dumb, handicapable. It sounds way too much like handicap. So again, the good and the bad and ugly is an easy way to try to remember. Then of course there's exceptions. There's something called disability identity. And a lot of the younger generation, the people that grew up with the ADA, I had my disability way before the ADA in 1982. Many young persons prefer using disabled as a disabled person, because their thing is, look, there's nothing wrong with having disability. I don't mind being identified with a disability. So that's something else to remember. Some people don't mind being called disabled. I don't like disabled because a lot of times when you listen to the radio and you hear on the radio on a traffic report, there's a disabled car ahead. What does that mean? It means it's broken down and in the way. And I don't consider myself as a person with disabilities being broken down or in the way. I get around just like anyone else. Political correctness. People think, is people first language politically correct? No, it's about accuracy, as I mentioned, and creating reasonable expectations for individuals with disabilities. If you said called somebody crippled, would you expect that much from them? No, it'd be very low expectation. People with disabilities are not defined by their disability. It's an aspect of who they are, but it's not the only aspect. Language. Caveat, do not avoid speaking to someone with a disability out of fear of saying the wrong thing. That's why I was saying that people with disabilities are people first. And it's better to have somebody contact you than being invisible and people try to avoid you because of fear of saying the wrong thing. It's okay to say to a person with a visual impairment, see you later. Many people with disabilities have a sense of humor. I have a sense of humor. It's a little bit on the dry side. But again, you want to avoid such things as deaf and dumb, afflicted, suffering. I was not punished by God for having my disability. When you say somebody's afflicted or suffering from, it tends to have that connotation. And then mental health issues. The terms mental health and psychiatric disability are essentially interchangeable. Also, some groups prefer one term to the other, but in general, both terms are considered acceptable. A possible alternative to describe a person as someone who has mental health issues. I like that. That's my preferred for folks. And then again, mental health issues. Don't assume that people with psychiatric disabilities are more likely to be violent than people without psychiatric disability. This is a myth. It's probably because of movies like The Shining, here's Johnny and he's holding an axe. That's not people with psychiatric disabilities usually. And do not assume that all people with psychiatric disabilities take or should take medications. There's coping mechanisms besides medication. And if someone with a psychiatric disability gets upset, ask calmly if there's anything you can do to help them, and then respect what they tell you. So again, don't get distressed. Remain calm and ask somebody how you can help them. And then all people with disabilities can meet in a convention each year or know each other. I was once in an airport in Birmingham and I was flying somewhere. A gentleman came up to me, he's very serious. He said, I noticed that you're using a wheelchair. And I said, boy, I was thinking to myself, this guy is really observant. He said, I know Fred. He said, do you know Fred in Texas who also uses a wheelchair? I don't, but I wouldn't mind. But just because I use a wheelchair, I don't know everybody else that uses a wheelchair. Another myth, people with disabilities cannot work. They can work. I was once somewhere and somebody said a statement, people who use wheelchairs can't work. And I'm sitting there right next to it. I'd been working that time for 30 years. Disability is contagious. Now, I don't know, but if you're around somebody too long, you'll notice a numbness in the legs first. You're around a wheelchair user and then you become paralyzed. No, it's not contagious. People with disabilities are superheroes or inspirational. I don't mind people saying I'm inspiration, but what would you do if you were in that circumstance? Would you give up or would you keep going? You probably keep going. People with disabilities can live off the government. That's the biggest joke. When I got out of school, somebody once said that to me and I was interviewing for a lawyer job. My student loans are so high that what I could get never having worked would not even cover my student loans from law school. All right, truth. Disability is a natural part of the human experience. People with disabilities want to be fully contributing members of society. What you do at the career centers will help people with disabilities become fully contributing tax-paying members of society. Applying facts eliminates myths. And I'm trying to give you the facts so that you can get away from myths. And then sharing disability etiquette information. Reception and service staff should be trained in disability etiquette, specific ways of being courteous and welcome to individuals who may have disabilities, both visible or hidden. Most disabilities are hidden. Vision impairments, blindness. How do you interact with somebody? I've already talked about ways to provide effective communication, but guiding somebody, how would you guide somebody? Would you just grab their arm? No, you would put your arm out to them and and put it near their hand so that they could grab your shoulder or your arm and you could start leading them. But you need to identify yourself when you approach a person who's blind. And when you give directions, be specific and note obstacles. Don't say it's over there and point. That's a blind person. You say you need to go right or left. Watch out, there's a curb or there's threshold. Describe obstacles. Offer assistance, but wait for direction. Let the person know if you walk away. If you're having a conversation with somebody who's blind and it ends and you just walk away, they may continue talking because they don't know that you've walked away. And then hearing impairments or deafness. I've already given you strategies for effective communication. Talk directly to the person, not the American Sign Language interpreter. Before speaking, make sure you have his or her attention. If the person is speaking, is speech or lip reading, face the person. Keep your hands and objects away from your mouth and maintain eye contact. It's very important. A lot of people cover their mouth when they're talking. If people read lips, that won't work if you have your hand over your mouth, obviously. And if you do not understand the person's speech, ask that it be repeated or written down. So never pretend to understand somebody. And then physical or mobility disabilities. We talked about the physical access issues, but people with physical or mobility disabilities do not have a mental impairment just because they have physical impairment. When I was first injured, somebody came up to me at my church and said, "Can he still talk?" I'm like, "Yes, I can. I've got a physical disability." And people with physical mobility disabilities are not helpless, but you want to maintain the personal space and individual. A lot of people don't want you to touch their cane or their wheelchair or other mobility aid. And if you interact with a person in a wheelchair for more than a few minutes, I've mentioned this, seat yourself so that you're both at eye level. Autism Spectrum, this is one of the groups where I said you do not make eye contact with many folks. Speech disabilities. Again, I've mentioned some of these. Talk to a person with speech disability as you would anyone else. Be patient. It may take a little while or a little long for the person to speak. Don't try to guess what they're going to say and try to finish their sentences. And if you do not understand, please ask them to repeat. And then hidden or non-obvious disability, what I call the invisible disabilities, like cognitive or intellectual or learning or psychiatric, may affect memory, attention span, sensory perception, ability to sort and understand information. It can include a health condition like diabetes or HIV or heart condition or cancer. May affect a variety of functions. And again, assisting people with hidden disability, respect requests for assistance, even when you can't see why the person is asking for it. A lot of people have disabilities that are intermittent too, and they have good days and bad days. And you're like, well, why are you using that accessible parking? I see you walking around. Well, they're having a good day, but parking closer enables them to conserve their energy. And follow the person's lead when it's a hidden disability. And please never make assumptions. And here's some references that I have listed here for you if you want to check up on some of the information provided. But I gave you a lot of information about the law, and that's the why and the how. I described a pretty good amount of time about interacting with people with all types of disabilities and how to serve them. And really, we want to eliminate stigmas. We want to eliminate the fear. People are sometimes uncomfortable about situations they never encountered. But see, the more practice you have and the more that you allow yourself to just relax and be calm around people with disabilities, you will see that it's not an extra burden to interact with them or help them. It's like serving anybody else. That's all I have. Do we want to have questions now, or we wait until after Michael's?
Hey, Graham, let's just go ahead and answer yours. You have some questions in the chat room. Well, my internet is going in and out. One of the questions, as a case manager with CAPTE, are we allowed to ask a participant if they require an accommodation? I have a disability and I'm loud about it, but so many people won't say anything. That's one of the questions. Are they allowed to ask
Right. I think what
people
you
coming into
do,
the Career Center
you-
to see CAPTE?
what you do, instead of asking that, you say, how can I help you, or what can we provide? Okay. Then if they disclose a disability, or they say that I want accommodation, then you go meet with them privately and you get more information. Sometimes you need more information in order to properly accommodate them. So I wouldn't ever say, what's your disability? Or if you're looking at somebody, wait and see what they need first. Okay. Don't jump the gun. But then if it becomes that they're asking for something that you only provide for people with disabilities, then you begin, that's once you think there's a reasonable accommodation issue. Okay. So somebody says, well, look, I'm going to need a CCTV and I'm going to need that document brailled. But if you see them walking in with a cane and they're obviously blind, I don't really think you need documentation. So that time you can say, I see that you have a significant visual impairment. What can we do to help you? So it depends on the situation. You want to avoid automatically asking somebody what their disability is just based on their appearance. You want to ask them first how you can help them and what they need, okay? And then once that develops and you think it's a reasonable accommodation, then that would trigger the interactive process that I talked about before, in which you can ask about disability. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? It's a good question.
Yes. We have two more questions, Graham. One is, what are your thoughts about special? I hear echo. What are your thoughts about special needs as an appropriate term? As an appropriate term for PWD?
All right.
People with disabilities.
I do not like special needs, because the needs of people with disabilities are not special. In fact, a lot of times I mentioned about Eddie Murphy at Saturday Night Live when he did a presentation, and he had a character called Special K, a person with disabilities. In making the needs of people with the quote special, the needs of people with disabilities are not special. They're basically what other people need, access in things that they are. It's not that they're special, it's they're necessary for them to receive the service. So I would avoid using the word special.
And the final question for you, Dr. Graham, System, is you may mention, I think you were talking about maybe the language, but someone else wanted to know about body language. What does your body language have to say about you when you're talking to a person with disability? Rolling your eyes, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's like anybody else. This is where I call equal opportunity, is you would want to treat anybody with good body language, but not making eye contact with many people with disabilities is not good body language. And having your arms folded up where you're in a defensive posture, you want to be opening and inviting. And I don't know if you can see, I'm holding my hands out in a position where they're not closed, where they're in front of me, where they're opening and inviting. So body language, I think, is crucial too. For folks, and even your tone, okay? You don't want to even talk in a demeaning tone. Or sometimes some people talk louder because the person who's blind, the blind person say, look, I don't have a hearing issue. And this is true. So that happens. So your tone and your body language and your demeanor are all important. Thank you for pointing that out. I think that's good.
And those were all the questions in the chat room. So thank you, Dr. System, for that information. We do have your contact information if somebody has additional questions. And now we're gonna bring on Mr. Michael Papp, I'm sorry, who is
do we want to do a short break for everyone to stand up and stretch? Because we've been doing this for about an hour.
Does anybody need a break?
Let's take 5 minutes. I think that's appropriate.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Well,
Well, Michael, are you ready? I think, I said 5 minutes, but I believe everybody's had a chance to take a good stretch and walk around a little bit. Are you ready, Michael?
He's muted.
Oh, yeah, he is. Well, we'll wait till he's ready.
Okay.
Hey, Michael, are you ready to proceed?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get everything going here. Okay.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, certainly. I have placed, let me make sure this is there. Oops. Let me redo this. Yeah, I wanted to put my contact information in the chat box. So if anyone needs to get a hold of me, they can. And now I need to switch to this. There we go. All right. So the presentation should be on screen. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, we see it.
All right. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat box. I can't see it right now, but we'll try and get to those afterwards. So I have placed my contact information into the chat box. So if anyone has any questions that they want to follow up with me about, they certainly can contact me. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to stand up and stretch. One of the things we've learned in the engineering and assistive technology program during this Zoom situation is that it's very important for everybody, whether they have a disability or not, to get up every 30 minutes or so and stretch, and especially rest your eyes. It's recommended that you look at something for about 30 seconds that's at least 20 feet away so that your eyes don't get strained by focusing on things that are so close to you. So that's just something we've learned about ergonomics. My name is Michael Papp. I'm with the Rehab Engineering Program at the Alabama Department of Rehab Services. And today we're going to be talking about a variety of different things concerning job accommodations and how we provide them. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the services that my particular program provides. And then we're going to discuss a variety of different types of assistive technology that are commonly used in the employment environment. And then I'm going to briefly go over the accommodation process, what our rehab engineers use to help determine what appropriate accommodations or the most effective accommodations are going to be. And then we were going to end by discussing 4 different past examples of accommodations that we have provided. So a little bit about myself. I've got over 20 years experience as a rehab engineer. Prior to that, I worked in the medical device manufacturing as an engineer in development and production. So I've got a lot of experience in actually producing things in a plant as well. My contact information here is here on this slide. It's in the chat box and will be provided again at the end. A bit about our program. Our rehab engineering program and assistive technology, we work with the entire agency, and we're committed to providing excellent services to all children and adults within the state and helping them overcome their disabilities using technology. And so we work with consumers to find appropriate technology. We help them learn how to use technology more effectively to help them out. And we will help design and develop technology if necessary. So some common job accommodations that we provide, and one of the most common ones is ergonomic and adapted desks. And so we do work with people who need wheelchair accessible offices in terms of helping them find an appropriate desk and helping them with filing cabinets and other things. We do a lot of stuff, especially with the veterans, with sit to stand desks and coming up with different technologies, or helping them find something that's appropriate that will allow someone with a back injury to sit and work from a sitting and standing position. So that, as I had mentioned earlier, we found with Zoom, it's kind of, it's helpful for people to get up and stretch periodically, especially for someone who has musculoskeletal disorders like a back injury. They do need to move periodically into different positions throughout the day. They don't need to maintain a static posture. And so it's important for that person to be able to go from sitting to standing back and forth as needed, maybe every 20 to 30 minutes, maybe every hour or two, depending on the person. We'll also help people in an office environment find adjustable arm supports, or an industrial environment. We do work with a lot of people who may be a pathologist in the medical profession. We might need to adapt their working, I say desk, but it's a workstation, and help provide them with some arm support so that their shoulders, so they don't have shoulder and neck strain. We also do adaptive seating and help people find ergonomic chairs that are going to fit them. And sometimes we need to find specialty seating products depending on what the person's doing. Again, someone who might be in a production or medical environment might need to be more in a forward position rather than sitting back as someone would be when they're typing. And so we might help them find a chair that would be appropriate for them. Footrest is another thing we do a lot of, because most offices have standard height office furniture. A lot of individuals, for a lot of people to sit at the proper height, their chair is too high for their feet to reach the ground. So we might provide them with a footrest to help them sit comfortably and be well supported. We'll also use footrests for people who work in a sitting or standing position if they have lower back issues, because the footrest allows them to periodically move their foot, put it up on a footrest, so that they can change their posture periodically throughout the day. Again, that reduces strain overall. And then we also do a lot of stuff with helping people improve their workflow. And so we'll go in a lot of times, and someone's phone might be on the wrong side. It might be on the left side of their desk, and they might be on the phone all day, and they might be right-handed. So we might help them figure out where to put that. We might help them figure out where to put their monitor and other pieces of work equipment, depending on what they need. If they only print something once a day, their printer doesn't need to be right next to the computer necessarily. There might be something more important that needs to go in that location. The next type of disability we do a lot of stuff with are people with learning disabilities, specifically having issues with reading and writing. As most of you probably experiencing your own professional lives, there's a lot of reports and emails and various things that need to be produced and sent out. And having spelling correct and grammar correct in those is critical for people to be successful as a professional. And so products like Text Help, Read and Write software, which is a very comprehensive software package, or something like Grammarly, which might be a subscription program that's about $10 per month. There is a free version, but the full version's around $10 to $12 a month. These products may be really beneficial to someone who has a learning disability or has has difficulty with writing and grammar, in terms of helping them produce written text that's more professional and helps them accomplish their professional goals. It also helps improve confidence. And so a lot of individuals who are they know they have difficulty with writing, even if it might not be due to a learning disability, they're just not comfortable with it. Providing supports like that may be very beneficial in helping people know that they don't have to worry and fret over making a severe grammatical error. That's something that the software can help catch. These programs can also help people with other types of literacy challenges as well. Something like Text Help is very robust in terms of helping people with doing research and being able to not only write, but read a lot of technical texts. And I'll talk about a case later where we use text to help read and write software for somebody. It can also assist people who have where English is a second language. And so people who may not be as confident in their English speaking and writing skills may also find a lot of benefit by using software like this. And our goal always in assistive technology and rehab engineering is to help people be as independent as possible by finding them tools and helping them learn how to use those tools so that they can perform the job tasks themselves successfully without having someone else have to step in. Another very common job accommodation is speech recognition software. And for a lot of folks may have heard of Dragon Naturally Speaking. You may have seen it advertised or have just heard about it in passing. It's the most powerful assistive voice to text program that's available. And so I'll use voice to text or speech to text kind of interchangeably, but that's when you talk and the computer responds to you. So Dragon is probably one of the better known ones. There is Windows speech recognition, which works okay. It just is really hard to learn how to use, but it's built into Windows. And then also part of speech recognition is having an appropriate microphone. And so we do recommend headset microphones for most people. That seems to improve the accuracy the best, where you have a microphone in front of your mouth. But we have found some desktop microphones that do okay for people who don't have the ability to put a headset on very easily. One of the nice things with Dragon as well is that there's a there's a legal version and there's a medical version for people who use specialized vocabulary, where a program like Windows speech recognition doesn't have that built in. The other nice thing we like about Dragon is that we can adapt programs that may not be designed to be accessible for use for hands-free operation by someone with a disability, with some of the programming features built into it. Adaptive computer access. This is something that both our assistive technology specialists and rehab engineers do a lot with. We do a lot of stuff with people working in office environments with ergonomics and looking at different types of mice and keyboards. I don't really consider these to be accommodations for disability. I think everyone needs to make sure that their workstation fits them and that the equipment that they're using fits them properly, which is what ergonomics is. But especially for someone who might be experiencing carpal tunnel syndrome or tendinitis, something like tendinous elbow, or might have had an injury like a brachial plexopathy. They might have had a car wreck and might have injured the nerves in their neck. We really do need to look at ergonomics and different types of nerve and muscle injuries in the arm, and tendinitises and ligament problems and all that can be addressed, in the effects of which can be reduced by ergonomics. I do want to note that ergonomic equipment will not fix an injury that already exists. So if someone has carpal tunnel syndrome already, giving them an ergonomic keyboard is not going to fix the carpal tunnel syndrome. They still need to have treatment for that, and that the ergonomic keyboard will reduce the tendency for the carpal tunnel syndrome to get worse, hopefully, if we find them the right equipment. So I do want to note that anything we do ergonomically, whether it's adjusting someone's workstation, giving them a different chair or whatever, is not medical treatment. It does not improve the condition. It simply hopefully it reduces the effect of that condition. So we also do a lot of adapted keyboards as well, like one-handed keyboards. We do work a lot with people who may have lost functionality in one hand. And so there's one-handed keyboards, and there's typing techniques for standard keyboard that you can type with one hand. So that's part of the training that we provide. We also do stuff with adapted mice and trackballs and different types of joystick mice. I do have two pictures on the screen of what a trackball looks like. the mouse with the red ball on top of it. Trackball is like a mouse that's been flipped over, where you move the ball with your hand instead of moving the whole device around. So it's good for people who have shoulder injuries where they can't move their arm as effectively. If they just, instead of moving the whole mouse like this, they can just move their hand and move the mouse around the screen. And then a joystick style mouse might be a very effective solution for somebody like that as well. We do work with some of the more advanced types of computer controls, like head trackers, which is a specialized camera system that will track how someone's moving their head. It will actually move the mouse pointer around, and in combination with an on-screen keyboard will allow them to type. And then there's eye gaze control as well for someone with really significant disabilities. For an adult who's employed, commonly they would have something like ALS or a very high level spinal cord injury, might be using eye tracking software to control a computer system. So vision impairment is another big area that we work in. We are not the only providers of vision impairment services. AIDB through the regional centers and EH Gentry facility do a lot of stuff with vision impairment as well. But our staff are primarily looking at CCTVs, also known as video magnifiers, for people who are employed. And these are devices that will take printed material like a letter, a bill, whatever might be printed, and will enlarge it for them. And so that it allows an increase in font size. Most of the career centers should have one of these. It also helps enhance the colors and text and contrast to make something more visible. Some of the more advanced CCTVs also have text to speech, where they will take a picture of the text that's on the screen and read it back to the person. So that's different from speech to text, where you talk and the computer does something. This is where the computer talks to you as text to speech. So we also do a lot of stuff with computer screen magnifiers. And this is software that will run on your computer. The basic version is built into Windows, which will enlarge text on the screen and will enhance contrast in the mouse pointer to help somebody see what's on the screen and help them see what they're doing. Programs like at EH Gentry and the AIDB regional centers will also work with screen readers, which provide speech and braille output for individuals who do not have functional vision. So they may be able to see, but they may not see well enough for screen readers, or I'm sorry, for enlargement software to be of use to them. And so screen readers are available where it will read everything that's on the screen. It will repeat back to the person everything that they're doing, anything they're trying to click on or select. And they also provide braille output. And so some common products out there are JAWS is probably the most popular in the United States. Dolphin Supernova is another very popular one that includes magnification and screen reading. And then there's a free version a lot of people who are functionally blind use at home called NVDA. It stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access, and it's an open source program. I don't recommend it for work necessarily, but it's something that can be of use to a lot of students and to individuals who need a screen reader at home. Another thing that the rehab engineering program works with are augmentative communication devices, and you may have seen people using these before. It is a computer that someone can type into that will talk for them. And so for an individual who might have severe cerebral palsy or may have had a tracheotomy for some reason, who cannot use their own voice very effectively, they might use a computer to talk for them, which is called a communication device. And we do work with those individuals to help them find an appropriate device and help them figure out how to transport it. So some people maybe someone has had a stroke, they might have something that fits in their pocket they can pull out and use. For someone in a wheelchair who has very limited mobility, we might have a specialized mounting device, like the gentleman on this in the picture has a communication device that that is mounted to his wheelchair. Another thing we do is help people who need voice amplification. So we do get referrals periodically for people who are employed who have had a injury to their voice box or some other sort of injury, or disability such as multiple sclerosis, where they might not have good breath support as a result of neurological disorder. And so their voice volume is very low. And for them to be heard effectively, they might need a personal amplifier. And so we will help them find a device that is that provides voice amplification. For people who are hearing impaired, a product, and I know some of the career centers have these, is called the Ubi Duo. This is sold primarily for businesses, but it provides a quick method of communication for people who are deaf. And the way this works, there's two keyboards with screens on them that are paired together. And when you need to communicate with someone who would use sign language, and you don't know sign language, and you need a real quick method of communication, this device can be used for that, where each of you can type your messages back and forth to each other on this device. There are apps available and different computer programs as well, but this is, so like I said before, this is primarily sold to businesses so that they can have something at their customer service counter if they need something really quickly that they can pull out and use. This is simple because you just pull it out, you press the on button on both sides, and you can just start communicating. You don't have to download apps and get everyone all matched up. But it does allow for face-to-face communications by typing. Another common issue for people who are employed who have a hearing impairment is that they need a hearing aid compatible phone or captioning on a phone. And so the phones that are available provide voice amplification or amplification on the receiver side. A lot of them are hearing aid compatible. And one of the things I do want to note is that not all phones that are hearing aid compatible work with all hearing aids, and vice versa. And so some phones work well with one particular type of hearing aid or one person's hearing aid, or it might not work with another person's hearing aid. And so it makes it very hard to find the proper phone. Sometimes you have to go through one or two to find a phone that works properly with somebody's hearing aid. It can be kind of tricky. Most audiologists who work with assistive technology can help someone figure out what phone is going to be more effective. Some other things that you might find on a hearing aid compatible phone is large print buttons. And the particular phone that is pictured is a CAPTE phone that is hearing aid compatible. It has large print buttons. It has a speakerphone function available so that for someone who can't hold a receiver, they can operate it as a speakerphone. And CAPTE phones also provide captioning services through the relay system. And so these phones are available for people to utilize. So they may have lost hearing later in life. They still communicate verbally, but they need text. They need to be able to read text of what someone is saying in order to understand clearly what they're trying to communicate. So the relay service is free. CAPTE phones are free for people with hearing impairment for home use. Businesses can purchase these. I have recently talked with one of the CAPTE service providers, and they say they do have a version that will work with voice over IP phones. There's some technical stuff that needs to be set up. There's an analog telephone converter that needs to be connected. But they can be used on the business environment. It just takes some IT staff to help set everything up. for it to work. Another, just one particular app out of the millions of apps that are out there for people with hearing impairment that I like particularly is it's called Ava. There's a free version and there, of course, is a paid version. But this is a phone app that allows group conversations, and it uses artificial intelligence to do the captioning. This is not something that you want to use like in a large meeting or anything, but the way it works is that you might have 3 or 4 people participating in a meeting or going to dinner with one person that needs captioning. Each person will have a copy of the Ava app on their phone, and when they have it set in front of them like a speakerphone, and when they talk, it will transcribe what they're saying text to speech, and it will show up on the person who has a hearing impairment who needs captioning can read that, and they can see who is saying what as well. I will say about captioning that's provided by artificial intelligence is it's not as good as what's being provided by a person, by a human being. But as a stopgap measure, it is something that can be effective as long as everyone communicating can help clarify if there's something that's been misunderstood by the captioning program. So, and it is effective in small groups, especially in a quiet environment. And so that is something that is available. Okay, so one of the, I think this may be my last common set of accommodations, is we do a lot of stuff with supported employment throughout the state as well, both with Project Search for the agency, which works with the school systems and transition age students, and the various ARCs and United Ability and other providers of supported employment services. And so we do help, especially with cognitive and organizational support, because a lot of the staff, people who are using supported employment have issues with cognition and staying organized. And so there's a wide array of technologies that are available, especially in reminder apps and organization apps to help people out with that. One of the keys is helping the individual and their job coach or employer or manager learn also how to use that technology effectively together so that they can work. Another piece of technology that we have looked at and we have provided to some people is there's some information or there's some devices that have come out that provide biofeedback and mindfulness technologies for people who have difficulty with focus. And so that's another piece of technology that we've been experimenting with and helping people with. And so I had mentioned some of the types of reminder apps. There's a lot of things that will run on an Android or iPhone and are compatible with an Apple Watch or other types of smartwatches. And they will provide people with reminders on when they need to get to different locations, or for example, if they have to get on a bus or meet a bus at a certain point in time, it will pop up. It will help people. It can help people stay on task, remember to keep moving, and help them keep productive. And so it's a matter of just finding the proper piece of technology for somebody and helping them learn how to use it. I had mentioned training and especially with reminder apps. And one of the things I just wanted to mention specifically is that a lot of people think of assistive technology as a special device, and that's not necessarily true. I don't know how many people out there use Google Calendar, but it's a really powerful tool for folks. And we have worked a lot with students and people with ADHD or organizational issues and learning how to use Google Calendar to help keep them scheduled and on task. And especially because Google Calendar can be shared with other family members or caregivers, it can be utilized to help someone who has organizational difficulties, such as if they have autism, to help keep them on task and help keep them with a schedule and know what needs to be done next. And it provides plenty of reminders and everything. So I just wanted to show you kind of an example. There's a picture of a color-coded Google Calendar. This happens to be for a college student, but it's set up with every detail of what they need, like from 7 to 8 a.m., their morning routine, they need to get up. There's an alarm that goes off that tells them they need to get up. There's details within the calendar event that tell them exactly, brush your teeth, take a shower, etc., all that stuff. And then it has like when their first class is, when they need to get to their first class and their second class. And this person wasn't eating lunch. We need to remind them when they need to eat lunch. So it has all the time, everything scheduled out for that particular individual. And this is using a common piece of technology that's available for free to everybody, but it's being used as a piece of assistive technology. So I did just want to take the time to note that. Okay, so on to job accommodations. And so our engineering staff, we provide evaluations and recommendations for employees with disabilities. And we also help provide training and support. And so an example of one of the things that one of our rehab engineers developed for an individual working in fast food, he was hired to start cleaning the dining area, but he needed adapted brooms and mops and whatnot to help him hold. He had difficulty with dexterity, and a standard broom and mop was not something that he could hold on into and grip and use effectively. And so we were able to modify that equipment. And so this is a common thing that we might do. But the process of providing job accommodations and what a rehab engineer is going to do when they come in to provide accommodations is, first, we want to observe the task being performed, especially if it's something we're not familiar with. If it's a machine operator that is operating like a metal press for a roofing company, that's not something that they're familiar with. They're going to want to observe that task being performed and identify the skills and abilities that someone has to have to be able to perform that job task. Then we're going to take a look at the functional limitations of the individual with a disability, and we're going to compare their abilities and skills to the abilities and skills necessary to perform the job. And so if the job requires skills and abilities at this level and the person has skills and abilities at this level, we're looking at that gap between those two, and we try to identify technologies or techniques or ways of doing things that are going to fill that gap and either increase the person's ability so that they can meet the requirements of the job task, or can we simplify the job task and bring it down where the person's abilities are able to do that job task, or maybe we can adjust both of them. And so we're looking at that gap and we're trying to figure out what sort of technology is going to fill that gap. And then we produce recommendations and provide that to a vocational rehab counselor, maybe a supported employment provider, and a business, of course, can get copies of that. So with that, I wanted to go through four past job accommodations, just kind of outlining how things went and different particulars that were involved. And the first one, I'm going to talk about a plumber that actually came to us through a partnership with the Veterans Administration Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Program. They had a veteran with a service-related injury, had a back injury, and he was a master plumber, and he needed assistance in going back to work. And so the VRNE program contacted vocational rehab for technical assistance in providing that. And so this is a really good example of how the Alabama Department of Rehab Services partners with other agencies to work together to be able to help serve people with disabilities. But this veteran wanted to return to work as a master plumber. And so I went in on this case and we looked at the functional limitations of the individual and the job tasks that he needed to be able to perform. And so his limitations due to his back injury And this was a pretty severe back injury that he had due to an accident. And he could not stand or walk for long periods of time, and he was restricted to medium lifting. He had difficulty with overhead reaching, especially for any period of time. That's working with his hands above his head. And he had a limited ability to bend and stoop. And so we took a look at each of these functional limitations in relationship to particular job tasks that he had to be able to perform. And we came up with a list of technology accommodations that were going to be helpful for him. And so because he was a master plumber and he happened to be working on a campus, and a lot of the pipes, if you've been to a hospital or school or university, a lot of the pipes run overhead. His limited ability to work overhead was really an issue. And so we were able to find him a crank height. There's a height adjustable scaffolding that happened to be, it dropped down and folded up small enough where it could roll through doorways in the facility. And when he got it to where, say, he needed to replace a valve in an overhead pipe, he could get it to the location, he could raise it up, he could get up on it and do the work. Instead of having to extend his arms overhead really high, he could just do it more kind of at shoulder height. And that was pretty effective for him. For bending and stooping, and this is something plumbers do a lot, especially when they're working under sinks or on drinking fountains or whatnot, can be a big issue. And so we got him a rolling shop stool. And so this is something that was that was at such a height that he could sit on it. He was still mobile where he could move around. So imagine you're working under a sink, he could still move around, and it had a small tool tray on it. Where he could have his tools within easy reach and not have to reach in a very awkward posture to the side or to the back to be able to get to tools that he was using or materials he was using while he was performing a repair. For standing, a lot of what this gentleman did involved removing plumbing fixtures and bringing them back to the shop and rebuilding. There was pumps and toilets and all valves, all different types of things that he needed to rebuild in this facility. And so standing for a long period of time at the workbench was kind of a difficult issue. And remember when I mentioned in ergonomics for people with back injury, we like to be able to provide multiple positions so they can work from sitting and standing positions, because maintaining a static posture for too long a period of time aggravates those injuries. And so we were able to provide him with a bench height stool so that while he was performing a repair, he could alternate between sitting and standing. So he might have 4 or 5 things that he's going to repair in a given afternoon. He can stand up and work for a little bit. He can sit and work for a little bit, and alternating between those two help reduce the strain on his back. Another issue he had was heavy lifting. There were some fixtures that he had to move around that were pretty heavy. And so we were able to get a hydraulic lift cart for him so that he could take this cart to wherever the pump room was that needed to be, that stuff had to be removed from. He could raise it up, get the parts or valve or whatever it was onto the cart, lower it down, get it back to his workshop, raise it back up, get it onto the bench and repair it, and vice versa. And so this was a fairly simple accommodation to provide for him. Distance mobility, he did have difficulty moving quickly, and he was on a fairly large campus where he needed to be able to get around quickly, especially if there was a plumbing emergency. So we did get him we got him a 4-wheeled scooter with some baskets on it. And that way he could load it up with some parts if he needed to patch a leak really quickly or whatever he needed. He could throw that into the cart, into the basket on the scooter, get onto it, get to where he needed to go really quickly, and be able to perform that emergency repair. And then I've never seen this product before, but it's pretty cool, is apparently where he was at, they have to pull and repair a lot of toilets. And I don't know how many people have ever even had to replace the seal on their toilet at home, but it's very awkward to be able to lift a toilet up and move it out of the way to work underneath it, to fix a floor, or to replace the seals on it. But we did find a device called a toilet cart that was able to help him lift and set a toilet in place with very minimum strain on his back. This was a really cool tool. So, and so this is the sort of thing that a rehab engineer will help find when we're looking to accommodate somebody. We try and identify tasks that are having difficulty with, what the problem is with that task, and then find tools that are available that will help perform that task. And so the next case we're going to talk about is a log truck driver who had experienced a traumatic brain injury. And so this gentleman was a licensed commercial truck driver. As many of you probably know, truck drivers, there's not enough truck drivers in Alabama. It's very popular for people to go into that, and there's a lot of need for people who are good truck drivers. And so this gentleman was really valued by his employer, but he was having difficulties caused by some of the effects of the brain injury, maintaining employment, but he was motivated, really highly motivated to continue working. And so we identified the issues that he was having. He had a couple of different functional limitations. Brain injury is not very consistent from person to person. It can have very weird effects. I'm not sure that's the right term. It affects people differently. And when I receive a referral for someone who has a brain injury, I never really know what we're going to actually have to address with that person. But in this particular case, the gentleman had really severe problems with chronic migraine headaches, and he also had intermittent vision impairment in his right eye. And so both of these things put together were really making it difficult for him to maintain employment. And so the vocational rehab counselor did a great job finding him a good neurologist who specialized in brain injury to help treat his headaches. And they were able to get him on the proper medication regime to reduce the migraines to a point that they weren't as, they didn't affect his ability to work quite as badly. The other thing we did is understanding that a truck driver needs to have full vision down both sides of their vehicle. They need to be able to turn their head and look. And he had a little bit of a neck problem, but with the intermittent vision loss to his right side, he had to turn all the way around, kind of like this, to look back to see down the right side of his truck, which was a problem. And so what we ended up doing was getting him some flat and cross view mirrors to mount to the fenders on his truck, so he didn't have to turn his head quite so far, so he could see. He could turn just far enough to look at his right front fender with his left eye, so that he could see if there was anything on the right side of the truck. Imagine like when you're going to turn and you see people try and cut inside trucks all the time when they're trying to make that right turn. This enabled him to be able to see that. So those accommodations were pretty effective for that gentleman, and he was able to maintain his employment. The next case I want to talk about was a gentleman working in a shipping department at a local business, and his disability, the functional limitations that he was experiencing were vision impairment, and he had really poor dexterity. And these two things combined together were making it very hard for him to pack stuff, put items into a box where they were professional looking. The tape was kind of all over the place. It was wrapped around the box strangely, and it was creased, and it just didn't look very good. And it wasn't meeting the standards of the employer. And so he was actually working with a job coach who had contacted me, and they were thinking that he was just having difficulty gripping the tape gun. And so they wanted me originally to figure out a way to like make a tape gun glove or a gauntlet or something that would strap it to his forearm, and which wasn't going to be I was like, well, we can make something like that, but let me come out and look. And this is why I think it's really important for someone like a rehab engineer to come out and take a look when someone's having a job related issue and do a professional evaluation. Because the issue with the poor dexterity and his vision, not being able to locate things on or see kind of everything on the box very well, wasn't going to be solved by giving him a tape gun glove. The real issue that he was having, sorry, let me go back here real quick. The real issue he was having is that he was having difficulty coordinating between his two hands. And that when I've worked in shipping receiving when I was in high school, so you have to move one hand in one direction holding the box, and you have to move the tape gun in the other direction. And for somebody who has difficulty with hand-eye coordination and hand-to-hand coordination, it's hard for them to move one hand doing one thing, the other hand doing another thing, and to coordinate all that. And only by observing him on the job with the job coach was I able to see that that's really what the problem was. And so we came up with a custom packing tape table for him. And I'm told that the employer really liked this and they planned on installing it on their shipping and receiving. But the way this was designed is that there was a light surface and a black plastic fence that was adjustable, and it could be adjusted for different box widths. And so he could very quickly, because the tape mechanism was mounted to the table, he could align the box on the fence. He could attach the tape to the end of the box and then use both of his hands doing the same motion. He could tape the entire box up. And it really, it probably quadrupled his speed in taping the box, but it also came out perfect every single time. And so those two things put together, plus there's no lost packing tape gun. So for anyone out there who's ever worked in shipping receiving, finding a packing tape gun sometimes is pretty tricky. So that also put that issue to rest. You never got buried under anything. They was always in the same place. So there were some other accommodations we provided for him there too, but that was probably the biggest one. And that's the sort of thing that a rehab engineer can help develop for somebody. So the last case I wanted to talk about was learning disability. These are learning disabilities, very common in Alabama. A lot of people have them. A lot of professional folks have them. And so this happened to come to me as an individual who was planning on going to college, and we worked with her throughout her college career and then into her professional life. But she came as a student with a variety of different types of learning disabilities, and her goal was to work in a law office, perhaps become a lawyer at some point. She needed to go to college for that. So her specific functional limitations were dysgraphia, which is difficulty with writing, dyslexia, which is difficulty with reading, dyscalculia, which is difficulty with math. And she also had a receptive language disorder related to reading. And so I have a little video here on the screen of one person's interpretation of what this dyslexia might be like, trying to read when the letters seem to be moving and flipping around on the screen can be very difficult. And so these are the sorts of things that we had to work with her to overcome in order to have her be a successful student and hopefully move on to law office at some point. And so we provided her with electronic textbooks and a program I mentioned earlier, Text Help Read and Write, that could read those textbooks to her. And it helped her not only being able to read the text to her, but it would also highlight the words as it was reading. So she was getting, since she had a receptive language disorder, having her see the word and hear the word together really helps improve someone's ability to understand something. It reduces the cognitive load. So that worked very well for her. And we also provided her with a digital recorder. And so I just wanted to show you Text Help, an example of what the software looks like. This runs on a Windows computer on this particular example. And it puts a toolbar at the top of your screen. So Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and everything run just normally, but it provides advanced spell checking. It has a dictionary built in to help people figure out if they're using the correct word. The biggest thing it has is text to speech, which is where it will read and highlight to somebody for somebody. So as I mentioned, especially for someone with dyslexia and a receptive language disorder, the reading with highlighting can be very beneficial for an individual. And most folks I have with those diagnoses, this is a pretty effective method for being able to help with written text. This can also scan text in. So if the only copy is in hard copy, if you have a scanner connected to your computer, you can scan that hard copy like a book in and it can read it to you. But the reality is nowadays almost everything's available in electronic format. And we also provided her with a digital recorder, which again is a common item for people who have difficulty with note taking. There are more modern technologies available now. I guess this was a few years ago. So we like using smart pens, and there's a lot of note-taking apps that will record audio and sync it with what's being typed in or handwritten as well. So this happened to be something that was effective for her, but depending on the individual, we might look at another method of taking notes. All this technology transferred to the workplace for her, and so as she progressed through her college career, she was very successful. She went on to grad school. She got a job at a law office, started as a paralegal. I haven't talked to her in a long time, so I don't know where she's at now. Hopefully she's a lawyer. But these accommodations that we provided for her in college were very effective for her in her professional, in her professional life once she started working. And so with that, those were 4 really quick examples. I really do appreciate your time and taking this very morning to listen. If you need to contact me, I did put my contact information in the chat box. Please feel free to call me with any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. And so we have a little time for live questions now. We can go to that. Does anyone have any questions? Let's see.
Got one in the chat room. Let's see, Michael. I'm having problems with my internet. Oh, they're just saying you did a fabulous job. Thank you so much. You did a great job, Michael. And I had someone text me and ask me if they could get a copy of your presentation. And I shared with them that it will be on the CAPTE website, but we could also email it as well. It's a large document, but it should be on the website.
I have a PDF version of notes for that presentation. Anyone who would like a copy, I'd be happy to email it to you. Just shoot me an email and say you want it, and I'll send it to you. I'd be happy.
Well, if no one has any questions, we thank you for joining us today for this training. Everything is virtual now that we're doing, and it's always better in person when you can raise your hand and ask questions. But again, this is our new normal. And we thank you all for joining us. If you have questions for Michael Papp, or, well, I see a hand up in the air, Ms. Womack. Keith, can you take her mic off?
Oh, no. It was the reaction, so I was just clapping. It was really awesome.
Oh.
And yes,
okay.
I would like to have that information as well, because it was very informative in how we can better assist some of the interns that we have this year. I apologize.
That's okay. So if there are no questions, Michael Papp's information is on the website, as well as Dr. Graham's systems. His information, his contact information will be on there as well. And you can always contact or go to our ADRS website and look at, again, what other services and opportunities that we have available that you may be interested in for an applicant or one of our consumers that you're working with. So again, we thank you for your time. I want to say enjoy the sunny day, but it's not sunny outside. Enjoy the day anyway. It's beautiful still, just a beautiful thing just to be alive and see people. So have a great weekend and thank you. Anything you want to add, Keith?
No, I just want to thank all our partners for participating and staying online for the duration. This was great, valuable information. And we want to thank our presenters, Michael Papp and Dr. Sisson, and you, Yolanda, for keeping us on time. Again, thank you all for very much, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.